Margaret was the kind of woman who blended into the background, unnoticed by most people. She lived in a small, quiet town where life moved at its own slow pace. Her days started early and ended late, filled with hard work that left little room for rest or indulgence. Margaret worked 2 jobs to keep her modest lifestyle afloat. By day, she served coffee and pancakes at the local diner, and by night, she cleaned offices in the nearby business district. Despite her exhausting routine, Margaret carried herself with dignity. She took pride in her work, no matter how humble it seemed, and always greeted others with a warm smile. Though her world revolved around responsibilities, Margaret often found herself dreaming of something more. On her way home from work each evening, she would pass by a grand hotel downtown. The building stood tall and elegant, its windows gleaming under the golden sunlight. Margaret couldn't help but pause sometimes to admire it. To her, the hotel represented everything she didn't have: a touch of luxury, comfort, and escape from the grind of daily life. It wasn't just a building, it symbolized possibility, a world beyond her struggles. One chilly autumn evening, as Margaret walked past the hotel after finishing her shift, an idea sparked in her mind. She had been saving money for months, bit by bit, penny by penny, for reasons she hadn't fully decided yet. But now, standing there looking at the glowing entrance, she made up her mind. Why not treat herself? After all, she deserved a break, didn't she? Margaret imagined stepping inside that grand lobby, feeling the soft carpet beneath her feet, and being treated like someone special for once. It felt almost impossible, but also exciting. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream big. The next few weeks flew by as Margaret planned her mini getaway. She carefully set aside enough money to cover a weekend stay at the hotel, along with meals and maybe even a spa treatment if she could afford it. Every coin she saved brought her closer to making her fantasy a reality. Finally, the day arrived. Margaret woke up earlier than usual, her heart racing with anticipation. She picked out her nicest dress, a simple navy blue number she'd worn to her cousin's wedding, and polished her shoes until they shone. She packed a small suitcase with essentials and headed toward the hotel, trying to calm her nerves. As Margaret approached the towering glass doors of the hotel, she hesitated for a moment. What if they turned her away? What if she didn't belong there? Shaking off her doubts, she reminded herself that she had every right to be here. She had earned this. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The lobby was even more breathtaking up close. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting shimmering light across the marble floors. A pianist played softly in the corner, adding to the air of elegance. Margaret felt both awestruck and out of place, but she held her head high. She walked up to the front desk, clutching her purse tightly. The concierge glanced up briefly before returning to his computer screen. "Can I help you?" he asked without much interest. Margaret cleared her throat and replied politely, "Yes, I'd like to book a room for the weekend." The man looked her over quickly, her plain dress, her scuffed shoes, her modest suitcase, and frowned slightly. Without checking his system, he said, "I'm sorry, we're fully booked." Margaret blinked, stunned. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I called last week and they said there were rooms available." The concierge shrugged dismissively. "Things change," he muttered, barely glancing at her again. Defeated and humiliated, Margaret mumbled a thank you and turned away, her cheeks burning with shame. As she exited the hotel, she couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't been turned away because of availability. It was something else entirely. Something about the way he looked at her made her stomach churn. That night, sitting alone on a park bench near her apartment, Margaret replayed the scene in her mind over and over. She had worked so hard to save for this trip, only to be rejected based on appearances. It wasn't fair. But instead of letting bitterness consume her, Margaret felt a strange sense of determination rising within her. If they thought she didn't belong in that hotel, she would show them otherwise, not for revenge, but to prove to herself that she was worth far more than they assumed. Over the following days, Margaret began to think differently. She realized that while she couldn't change how others saw her, she could change how she presented herself. More importantly, she could remind herself of her own value. Margaret started small, investing in a few key pieces of clothing and practicing, walking with confidence. She watched videos online about posture and self-assurance, determined to carry herself like someone who belonged anywhere she chose to go. Slowly but surely, she transformed, not just outwardly, but inwardly. Margaret learned to see herself as capable and deserving, regardless of what others might think. Her plan crystallized one evening when she came across a limousine rental advertisement in the newspaper. An idea struck her. Why not return to the Yao Hotel in style? Not to flaunt her success, but to reclaim her dignity. Margaret booked the limo for a single night, knowing it would cost nearly all her savings. But this wasn't about money anymore. It was about proving a point, both to the hotel staff and to herself. When the driver arrived to pick her up, dressed in his crisp uniform, Margaret climbed into the back seat with a mix of nerves and excitement. Tonight she would step into that hotel as the person she truly was, strong, resilient, and unapologetically worthy. The rejection at the hotel lingered in Margaret's mind like a shadow she couldn't shake. That night, as she sat alone on the park bench, her thoughts raced with questions and doubts. Had she done something wrong? Was it her clothes, her shoes, or was it simply the way she carried herself? The concierge's dismissive tone echoed in her ears, replaying over and over like a broken record. "We're fully booked," he had said, without even checking his computer. Margaret knew deep down that wasn't true. She had called ahead to confirm availability just days before. There had been rooms then, so why the sudden change? As the cool breeze brushed against her face, Margaret felt a wave of emotions crashing over her. Sadness, anger, embarrassment. For a moment, she allowed herself to wallow in it. She thought about how hard she had worked to save for this weekend getaway, a treat she had promised herself after months of relentless labor. Every late-night shift cleaning offices, every early morning serving customers at the diner, every penny saved had been for this. And now, it felt like all her efforts had been thrown back in her face. But as the minutes passed, something inside Margaret began to shift. The initial sting of rejection gave way to a deeper realization. The problem wasn't her. It was them. They had judged her based on her appearance, assuming she didn't belong in their fancy hotel. But who were they? To decide? Margaret may not have worn designer clothes or carried an expensive handbag, but that didn't make her any less worthy of respect. She had earned her place in the world through sheer determination and grit. No one had the right to diminish her because of how she looked. Still, the rejection hurt more than she cared to admit. Margaret wasn't someone who sought attention or validation from others. She prided herself on being independent and self-reliant. But this incident struck a nerve. It reminded her of all the times in her life when people had underestimated her, teachers who doubted she'd amount to much, classmates who teased her for wearing secondhand clothes, co-workers who dismissed her ideas because she wasn't one of them. Each memory surfaced like a scar she thought had healed but was still tender to the touch. What made this rejection different, though, was that Margaret didn't want to let it break her. Instead, she wanted to rise above it. Sitting there on the park bench, she made a silent promise to herself. She would return to that hotel, not out of spite, but to prove a point. Not to the staff, but to herself. If they thought she didn't belong there, she would show them that belonging wasn't about what you wore or how much money you had. It was about confidence, resilience, and knowing your own worth. Over the next few days, Margaret threw herself into planning her comeback. She started by reflecting on her appearance, not because she believed she needed to change for anyone else, but because she wanted to feel empowered. Margaret visited a local thrift store and picked out a few elegant pieces of clothing that fit her perfectly. She found a sleek black dress that hugged her figure and a pair of heels that gave her posture a boost. She even splurged on a new handbag, something small, yet classy. These items weren't extravagant, but they made her feel polished and put together. Next, Margaret focused on her mindset. She spent hours watching videos online about body language and self-confidence. She practiced walking tall, shoulders back, chin up. She rehearsed speaking clearly and assertively, imagining scenarios where she might encounter skepticism or judgment. Margaret realized that confidence wasn't just about looking the part. It was about believing in yourself so deeply that no one could shake your foundation. With each passing day, she grew more determined to reclaim her dignity. One evening, while scrolling through social media, Margaret stumbled upon an advertisement for a limousine rental service. At first, she laughed at the idea. It seemed so far removed from her reality. But as she stared at the glossy image of the sleek black car, an idea began to form in her mind. Why not arrive at the hotel in style? It wasn't about showing off or proving anything to anyone. It was about creating a moment for herself, a moment where she could step out of that limo and know, without a doubt, that she belonged wherever she chose to go. Margaret hesitated at first. Renting a limo would cost almost everything she had saved for her weekend getaway. But then she reminded herself, this wasn't just about a hotel room anymore. It was about taking back control of her narrative. It was about standing tall in the face of prejudice and saying, "You were wrong about me." So with a mixture of excitement and nerves, Margaret booked the limo for a single night. She wouldn't need it for long, just long enough to make her statement. In the days leading up to her return to the hotel, Margaret prepared meticulously. She rehearsed every detail, from what she would say to the concierge to how she would carry herself as she walked through the lobby. She imagined the looks on the staff's faces when they saw her stepping out of the limo, radiant and confident. Would they recognize her? Would they remember turning her away? Margaret didn't care either way. This wasn't about revenge. It was about closure, for herself. On the morning of her planned return, Margaret woke up early, her heart pounding with anticipation. She dressed carefully, paying attention to every detail. The black dress she had bought hugged her curves perfectly, and the heels added just the right amount of height. She styled her hair neatly and applied a touch of makeup, enhancing her natural features. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself, not because she looked different, but because she felt different. For the first time in a long time, Margaret saw strength and poise staring back at her. As the sun began to set, the limousine arrived right on schedule. The driver stepped out, opening the door for her with a courteous smile. Margaret took a deep breath and climbed inside, sinking into the plush leather seats. The interior smelled faintly of fresh flowers, and soft music played in the background. As the car pulled away from the curb, Margaret felt a thrill of excitement mixed with nervous energy. She was ready to confront the past, embrace the present, and step boldly into the future. The drive to the hotel felt surreal. Margaret watched the city lights blur past her window, her mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. Would the staff treat her differently this time? Would they apologize for their earlier behavior? None of that mattered, she reminded herself. What mattered was how she felt, how she carried herself, and how she viewed her own worth. By the time the limo pulled up to the hotel entrance, Margaret was calm and composed. She stepped out onto the red carpet, her head held high, and walked toward the gleaming glass doors. Tonight, she wasn't just Margaret, the waitress and cleaner. Tonight, she was Margaret, the woman who refused to be defined by anyone else's standards. As the limousine glided smoothly along the city streets, Margaret felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Excitement bubbled in her chest, but it was tempered by nerves. She couldn't help but wonder what awaited her at the hotel. Would the staff recognize her? Would they realize she was the same woman who had been turned away just weeks ago? And if they did, how would they react? These questions buzzed in her mind like bees, but Margaret quickly reminded herself why she was doing this. This wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about proving something to herself. The evening sky was painted with streaks of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. Margaret gazed out the tinted window of the limo, watching the world go by. People hurried along the sidewalks, cars honked in the distance, and the city hummed with its usual energy. But tonight, everything seemed different to her. The lights sparkled brighter, the air felt crisper, and even the chatter of strangers outside sounded more alive. It was as though the universe itself knew that tonight was special, a night when Margaret would step into her power and rewrite the story others had tried to write for her. When the limousine finally pulled up to the hotel entrance, Margaret's heart skipped a beat. The grand building loomed before her, its golden lights glowing warmly against the darkening sky. Valets stood ready to assist guests, their crisp uniforms adding to the aura of luxury. Margaret took a moment to steady herself, placing one hand on the cool leather seat beside her. She glanced at her reflection in the car's mirror one last time, ensuring every detail was perfect. Her sleek black dress hugged her figure elegantly, her heels clicked softly against the floor, and her hair framed her face in soft waves. She looked confident, poised, and utterly transformed. The driver stepped out of the limo and opened the door for her, offering his hand to help her exit. Margaret accepted it gracefully, stepping onto the red carpet with deliberate slowness. As she emerged from the vehicle, heads turned. Hotel staff paused mid-conversation to glance her way, and a few guests stopped to admire the sight. For a brief moment, Margaret felt like a movie star walking the red carpet at an awards show. Cameras didn't flash, of course, but the attention still made her pulse quicken. She smiled faintly, holding her head high as she moved toward the hotel's grand entrance. Inside the lobby, the scene was nothing short of breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting shimmering light across the marble floors. A pianist played softly in the corner, his notes floating through the air like whispers. The scent of fresh flowers filled the space, mingling with the subtle aroma of polished wood and leather. Margaret paused for a moment, taking it all in. This time, however, she didn't feel out of place. Instead, she felt like she belonged here, not because of her outfit or the limo she arrived in, but because of the quiet strength radiating from within her. Margaret approached the front desk, her steps measured and confident. The concierge on duty looked up, his expression shifting from polite indifference to mild surprise. He straightened slightly, his tone becoming noticeably warmer. "Good evening, ma'am," he said with a practiced smile. "How may I assist you?" Margaret met his gaze steadily, her voice calm but firm. "I'd like to book a room for the night, please." She spoke with authority, leaving no room for doubt or hesitation. The concierge nodded briskly, tapping away at his computer. "Certainly, let me check our availability for you." His demeanor was entirely different from the dismissive attitude she had encountered during her first visit. There was no scrutinizing glance, no raised eyebrow, just professionalism and respect. While the concierge worked, Margaret allowed herself a small, private smile. She noticed the way the other staff members now treated her with deference, their movements quick and attentive. A bellhop hovered nearby, ready to assist with her luggage, while a hostess offered her a glass of champagne from a tray. It was clear that her presence had commanded attention, not because of any label or status, but because she carried herself with undeniable confidence. Margaret realized then that people often saw what you projected. If you acted like you belonged, they believed you did. After a few moments, the concierge returned with a bright smile. "We have several rooms available, ma'am. Would you prefer a suite?" he asked, his tone almost apologetic, as if making up for past mistakes. Margaret nodded graciously. "Yes, a suite would be lovely, thank you." She handed over her credit card without hesitation, signing the paperwork with a flourish. The entire process was seamless, a stark contrast to her previous experience. When the concierge handed her the keycard, his smile widened. "Enjoy your stay, Miss Margaret. If there's anything we can do to make your visit more comfortable, please don't hesitate to ask." Margaret thanked him politely and followed the bellhop to the elevator, her suitcase trailing behind her. As the doors closed, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the shiny metal surface. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her, the woman who had walked into this very hotel just weeks ago only to be turned away. That version of herself had been uncertain, vulnerable and eager to please. But this Margaret was different. She was strong, self-assured, and unshakable. The transformation wasn't just external. It ran deep, rooted in the realization that her worth wasn't determined by anyone else's opinion. Once settled in her suite, Margaret took a moment to soak it all in. The room was exquisite, with plush furnishings, panoramic views of the city skyline, and a bathroom so luxurious it felt like stepping into a spa. She poured herself a glass of water from the complimentary minibar and sat by the window, gazing out at the twinkling lights below. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly at peace. The rejection she had faced earlier no longer stung. It had become fuel for her growth, a catalyst for change. But Margaret knew this victory wasn't just about reclaiming her dignity at the hotel. It was about embracing a new chapter in her life. She had spent years working tirelessly, putting others' needs before her own, and allowing the world to define her limits. Now, she was breaking free from those constraints. Tonight, she had shown herself, and anyone who doubted her, that she was capable of greatness. She didn't need validation from others to know her value. All she needed was belief in herself. As the night wore on, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the dingy diner where she served meals to the cramped offices she cleaned late at night, every step of her life had shaped her into the person she was today. Those experiences weren't burdens, they were lessons. They taught her resilience, patience, and the importance of staying true to herself. And now, sitting in this luxurious suite overlooking the city, she understood that success wasn't about wealth or appearances. It was about knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone dim your light. Before going to bed, Margaret jotted down a few thoughts in a small notebook she always kept with her. She wrote about the rejection, the pain it caused, and the fire it ignited within her. She wrote about the limo ride, the grand lobby, and the respectful treatment she received upon her return. Most importantly, she wrote about the lesson she had learned, that true confidence comes from within. No matter where life took her next, she vowed to carry that lesson with her, to face challenges with courage and embrace opportunities with grace. As she drifted off to sleep, Margaret felt a sense of triumph wash over her. She hadn't just proven a point to the hotel staff, she had proven it to herself. Tomorrow she would wake up and return to her ordinary life, but she would do so with a newfound sense of purpose. The woman who had once been denied entry to this very hotel was now lying in its most luxurious suite, dreaming not of revenge but of possibility. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Margaret's suite, casting a warm glow across the room. She woke up slowly, savoring the softness of the bed and the quiet luxury surrounding her. For a moment, she lay there taking it all in, the plush pillows, the elegant furniture, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. It was a stark contrast to her usual mornings, which began with the shrill beep of an alarm clock and the hurried rush to get ready for work. But today there was no rush. Today she allowed herself the rare indulgence of simply being present. After stretching lazily, Margaret rose from the bed and padded over to the window. The city below was already buzzing with activity. Cars zipping along the streets, pedestrians weaving through sidewalks, and the occasional honk of a horn breaking the rhythm of the morning. From her vantage point high above the ground, everything seemed smaller, quieter, almost serene. She felt a sense of detachment, as if she were observing the world from a bubble of calm. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, one that reminded her how much she had sacrificed to keep moving forward. Margaret decided to make the most of her stay. She ordered breakfast from room service, something she had never done before. When the tray arrived, laden with fresh fruit, steaming coffee, and buttery croissants, she marveled at the simplicity of such pleasures. Eating alone in her pajamas, surrounded by opulence, felt oddly liberating. There was no one to impress, no deadlines to meet, just the joy of savoring each bite without guilt or haste. For someone who had spent her life serving others, this small act of self-care felt revolutionary. Later that morning, Margaret ventured out of her suite to explore the hotel. She wandered through its halls, taking note of the intricate details she had overlooked during her previous visit. The art on the walls, the polished brass fixtures, the lush greenery scattered throughout the lobby, all of it spoke of care and craftsmanship. She stopped briefly at the concierge desk to ask about local attractions, and the staff greeted her with the same warmth they had shown the night before. Their smiles seemed genuine now, not forced or performative. Whether they recognized her from her earlier rejection or not, Margaret couldn't say. What mattered was that she no longer cared. She knew she belonged here, not because of their approval, but because she had earned it. Her stroll eventually led her to the hotel's rooftop garden, a hidden gem she hadn't noticed until now. The space was breathtaking, with vibrant flowers, spilling out of oversized planters and comfortable seating arranged around a central fountain. Margaret found a cozy corner and settled in, letting the gentle sound of trickling water soothe her thoughts. As she sat there, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Just weeks ago, she had been turned away from this very building, humiliated and defeated. Now she was sitting atop it, basking in a sense of triumph that came, not from revenge, but from self-discovery. Margaret realized that the hotel staff's behavior toward her had shifted dramatically since her arrival in the limo. They weren't treating her differently because she looked fancier or carried herself with more poise. They were responding to the confidence she exuded. Confidence wasn't something you could fake. It was a reflection of inner strength, a belief in your own worth that radiated outward. Margaret understood now that people often mirrored the energy you projected. If you acted like you didn't belong, they would believe you didn't. But if you carried yourself like you did, they couldn't help but see you differently. By late afternoon, Margaret returned to her suite to pack her things. Her weekend getaway was coming to an end, but she felt lighter than she had in years. This trip hadn't just been about reclaiming her dignity. It had been about rediscovering who she was beneath the layers of doubt and insecurity. Margaret packed slowly, folding each item with care, savoring the last moments of her luxurious retreat. Before leaving, she left a generous tip for the housekeeping staff, along with a handwritten note thanking them for their kindness. It was a small gesture, but one that came from the heart. Margaret believed in spreading kindness wherever she went, even when the world hadn't always been kind to her. As she stepped into the elevator to head down to the lobby, Margaret caught her reflection in the shiny metal doors. She smiled at herself, not out of vanity, but out of pride. The woman staring back at her was no longer the timid waitress who had been dismissed so casually. She was Margaret, the woman who had faced rejection, risen above it, and come out, stronger on the other side. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was emotional, mental, and spiritual. She had learned that true validation came from within, not from external appearances or others' opinions. When Margaret reached the lobby, the concierge greeted her warmly. "Checking out, Miss Margaret?" he asked, his tone friendly and respectful. She nodded, handing over her keycard. "Yes, thank you, I've had a wonderful stay." The man smiled broadly, clearly pleased with her response. "We're so glad to hear that. Please do come back and visit us again soon." Margaret thanked him and made her way to the exit, where the valet waited to hail her a cab. As she climbed into the car, she glanced back at the hotel one last time. Its grand facade shimmered in the afternoon sun, but it no longer intimidated her. It was just a building, a symbol of possibility, not perfection. The ride home gave Margaret time to reflect on everything she had experienced over the past 2 days. She thought about the rejection she had faced, the fire it had ignited within her, and the lengths she had gone to prove a point, not to the hotel staff, but to herself. She thought about the limo ride, the red carpet, and the way heads had turned as she walked into the lobby. But most of all, she thought about the lessons she had learned. She had discovered that confidence wasn't about looking perfect or having everything figured out. It was about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. When Margaret arrived back at her apartment, reality hit her like a wave. Her modest living space was a far cry from the luxury of the hotel suite. The peeling paint on the walls, the creaky floorboards, and the faint smell of last night's dinner reminded her of the life she had built for herself. one rooted in hard work and resilience. Yet, instead of feeling disheartened, Margaret felt grateful. She appreciated the comfort of her own home, the familiarity of her surroundings, and the knowledge that she didn't need fancy clothes or expensive accommodations to feel valuable. True wealth, she realized, wasn't measured in material possessions. It was measured in experiences, growth, and self-awareness. That evening, Margaret sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, jotting down more thoughts in her notebook. She wrote about the hotel staff's changed attitude, the power of confidence, and the importance of staying true to oneself. She also wrote about the future, not in terms of grand plans or lofty goals, but in small, meaningful steps. She wanted to continue growing, learning, and challenging herself. She wanted to carry the lessons she had learned into every aspect of her life, whether it was her job at the diner, her late-night cleaning shifts, or her interactions with others. As she closed her notebook and turned off the light, Margaret felt a deep sense of contentment. She knew life wouldn't always be easy. There would still be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But she also knew she had the tools to face them head-on. She had proven to herself that she was capable of rising above adversity, of turning pain into power, and of finding beauty in unexpected places. And that knowledge, more than anything else, was what made her feel truly unstoppable. The days that followed Margaret's return from the hotel were a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, she felt lighter, as though a weight she hadn't fully acknowledged had been lifted off her shoulders. On the other hand, life quickly returned to its usual rhythm: early mornings at the diner, late nights cleaning offices, and the endless hustle to make ends meet. But something inside Margaret had shifted. The woman who stepped back into her daily routine wasn't the same woman who had left it behind just a few days earlier. She carried herself differently now, with a quiet confidence that didn't need validation from others. At the diner, Margaret noticed subtle changes in how people interacted with her. Her co-workers seemed to listen more intently when she spoke, and customers greeted her with warmer smiles. It wasn't anything dramatic, just little shifts in tone and body language, but Margaret recognized them for what they were: reflections of her own transformation. When you changed the way you saw yourself, it often changed the way others saw you too. Margaret didn't seek out these differences. She simply observed them, grateful for the reminder that growth started from within. One particularly busy morning, at the diner, a group of businessmen sat down at one of Margaret's tables. They were dressed in sharp suits, their polished shoes tapping impatiently against the tiled floor. Margaret approached them with her usual professionalism, jotting down their orders with a friendly smile. As she turned to leave, one of the men called after her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice polite but firm. Margaret paused, expecting a complaint or request for something extra. Instead, the man added, "You're doing a great job. Keep it up." For a moment, Margaret was taken aback. Compliments like this weren't common in her line of work. People rarely noticed the effort it took to balance trays, remember special requests, and keep a smile on your face during chaotic rushes. But instead of brushing it off, Margaret thanked him sincerely, meeting his gaze with steady eyes. She realized then that her newfound confidence wasn't just affecting her, it was rippling outward, touching those around her in small but meaningful ways. Later that week, Margaret found herself reflecting on the lessons she had learned during her weekend at the hotel. She thought about the rejection she had faced, the determination it had sparked, and the triumph she had ultimately claimed, not over the hotel staff, but over her own doubts. She realized that the experience had taught her far more than how to carry herself with poise. It had shown her the importance of resilience, self-worth, and refusing to let others define her limits. These weren't just abstract concepts. They were tools she could use to navigate life's challenges. Margaret decided to share some of these insights with the young women she mentored in her community. Every Saturday afternoon, she volunteered at a local youth center, offering guidance and support to girls who reminded her of her younger self. Bright, hardworking, and full of potential, but often weighed down by insecurities and societal expectations. Margaret loved these sessions because they gave her a chance to connect with others while also reinforcing the lessons she had learned. During one session, Margaret brought up the topic of self-confidence. She didn't mention her experience at the hotel directly. She didn't want to come across as boastful or self-centered, but she shared the broader message. Sometimes, she began, addressing the group of teenagers gathered around her, people will judge you based on things you can't control. Your clothes, your accent, where you come from. All of that might shape how others see you. But here's the thing. None of it defines who you are. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. True confidence doesn't come from looking perfect or having everything figured out. It comes from knowing your worth even when no one else sees it. And trust me, once you start believing in yourself, the world starts treating you differently. Not because you've changed who you are, but because you've changed how you carry yourself. The girls listened intently, nodding along as Margaret spoke. One of them raised her hand hesitantly. "But what if people still treat you badly?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Margaret smiled gently, recognizing the fear behind the question. "That's going to happen sometimes," she admitted. "Not everyone will understand or appreciate you, and that's okay. What matters is that you understand and appreciate yourself. When you know your value, other people's opinions don't hold as much power over you." Her words resonated deeply with the group. After the session ended, several of the girls lingered to thank her, their eyes shining with gratitude. Margaret felt a surge of pride, not because she had inspired them, but because she had reminded them of their own strength. She knew firsthand how isolating it could feel to face judgment or rejection, and she wanted these young women to know they weren't alone. If she could overcome her struggles, so could they. As the weeks went by, Margaret continued to integrate the lessons she had learned into her everyday life. At work, she focused on maintaining her composure, even during stressful moments. When a customer snapped at her for getting their order wrong, she apologized calmly without letting it shake her confidence. When a coworker criticized her for being too ambitious, she brushed it off, reminding herself that ambition was a virtue, not a flaw. Each small victory reinforced her belief that she was capable of handling whatever came her way. Outside of work, Margaret made time for herself in ways she never had before. She started taking long walks in the evenings, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the golden hues of falling leaves. She treated herself to little luxuries: a new book, a favorite dessert, an afternoon spent painting in her tiny apartment. These acts of self-care weren't extravagant, but they mattered. They reminded her that she deserved happiness, not as a reward for hard work, but as a basic right. One evening, as Margaret sat by her window sketching a picture of the city skyline, she thought about the hotel again. She hadn't planned to return there anytime soon. It wasn't practical given her budget, but she didn't feel the need to either. That chapter of her life was closed, not because she had moved on from it, but because she had grown beyond it. The hotel represented a turning point, a moment when she had chosen to rise above adversity and embrace her true self. Now she carried that lesson with her wherever she went. Margaret also reflected on the staff at the hotel, the concierge who had dismissed her, the valets who had scrambled to assist her upon her return, and the housekeeping team who had kept her suite immaculate. She wondered if any of them remembered her, if they had discussed her dramatic transformation among themselves. Did they realize how much their behavior had affected her? Probably not, she thought. Most people went through life unaware of the impact their actions had on others. But Margaret wasn't angry with them anymore. She understood that their judgments stemmed from ignorance, not malice. And while she couldn't change how they saw the world, she could choose how she responded to it. By the end of the month, Margaret felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced rejection, risen above it, and emerged stronger on the other side. More importantly, she had discovered a reservoir of strength within herself that she hadn't known existed. Life would always have its ups and downs, its moments of triumph and heartbreak, but Margaret knew she could handle them. She had proven that to herself, not through grand gestures or flashy displays, but through quiet determination and unwavering belief in her own worth. As she prepared for bed one night, Margaret glanced at the notebook where she had written her reflections during her stay at the hotel. She flipped through the pages, reading snippets of her journey. The pain, the growth, the lessons learned. Then, she picked up her pen and added one final note. Confidence isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone take that away from you. With those words, Margaret closed the notebook and turned off the light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new adventures. But for now, she was content. She had faced the world head-on and come out victorious, not because she had changed it, but because she had changed herself. And that, she realized, was the greatest triumph of all. Margaret's journey of transformation didn't stop with her weekend at the hotel or the lessons she had learned about confidence and self-worth. In fact, it was only the beginning. Over time, she began to see how those lessons rippled outward, touching not just her own life but also the lives of those around her. She realized that true growth wasn't just about personal victories. It was about using those victories to uplift others, creating a chain reaction of positivity and empowerment. One Saturday afternoon, as Margaret prepared for her weekly mentoring session at the youth center, she felt a deep sense of purpose. Teaching young women about resilience and self-belief had become one of the most fulfilling parts of her life. These sessions weren't just about sharing advice. They were about planting seeds of hope in hearts that needed it most. Margaret knew what it was like to feel unseen, underestimated, and dismissed. She wanted these girls to know they mattered, even if the world sometimes made them feel otherwise. That day, Margaret decided to focus on storytelling. She believed in the power of narratives, not just to entertain but to inspire action and change. Today, she told the group gathered around her, I want each of you to think about a moment when you felt strong. A moment when you stood up for yourself, tried something new, or pushed through a challenge. It doesn't have to be big. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage are the most powerful. The room fell silent as the girls thought about her words. One by one, they began to share their stories. There was Maria, who had mustered the bravery to audition for the school play despite her fear of public speaking. Then there was Jasmine, who had confronted a bully at school after years of staying quiet. Each story was unique, yet they all carried the same underlying theme: strength found in vulnerability, courage born from adversity. Margaret listened intently, nodding and smiling as the girls spoke. When it was her turn, she chose to share a version of her own experience: the rejection at the hotel and how it had sparked a journey of self-discovery. I could have let that moment define me, Margaret said softly, her voice steady and warm. I could have walked away feeling small and defeated, but instead I decided to prove something, not to them but to myself. I wanted to show myself that I was more than what they saw. And guess what? I am. So are you. Every single one of you has greatness inside you waiting to shine. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Her words hung in the air, resonating deeply with the group. Afterward, several of the girls approached her privately, thanking her for opening up. One girl named Elena stayed behind longer than the others. She hesitated before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't think I'm brave like you, she admitted. I always feel like I'm not good enough. Margaret knelt down so she was eye level with Elena, her expression kind but firm. Bravery isn't about never being afraid, she explained. It's about doing what scares you anyway. You're already braver than you think. You showed up here today, didn't you? That takes courage. Elena nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding lighting up her eyes. Margaret gave her a reassuring smile. Take it one step at a time. Celebrate every little victory, no matter how small. Before you know it, you'll look back and realize how far you've come. As the weeks passed, Margaret continued to pour her energy into mentoring. She noticed subtle changes in the girls' attitudes. They walked taller, spoke louder, and seemed less afraid to express themselves. Even the shyest among them began participating more actively in discussions, their voices growing stronger with each passing session. Margaret took pride in knowing she had played a part in their growth, but she also recognized that the credit belonged to them. They were the ones doing the hard work of believing in themselves. Beyond the youth center, Margaret's influence extended into other areas of her life. At the diner, she started encouraging her coworkers to pursue their dreams, whether it was going back to school, starting a side hustle, or simply taking better care of themselves. She shared motivational quotes during breaks, organized team-building activities, and offered practical advice whenever someone needed it. Her positivity became contagious, spreading throughout the workplace like wildfire. Customers noticed too, often commenting on the friendly and upbeat atmosphere. For Margaret, this was proof that kindness and encouragement could transform even the most ordinary spaces. At night, during her cleaning shifts, Margaret adopted a similar approach. She took the time to chat with the office workers who stayed late, asking about their days and offering words of support when they seemed stressed. Some of them opened up to her, sharing stories of burnout, imposter syndrome, or struggles with balancing work and family. Margaret listened without judgment, offering empathy and reassurance. "You're doing your best," she would say, "and that's enough. Don't forget to take care of yourself along the way." These interactions reminded Margaret of an important truth. Everyone was fighting battles you couldn't see. Whether it was a teenager struggling with self-doubt, a coworker overwhelmed by responsibilities, or a stranger dealing with personal hardships, no one was immune to life's challenges. By choosing kindness and understanding, Margaret hoped to make those battles a little easier to bear. Despite her busy schedule, Margaret made sure to carve out time for herself. She understood that self-care wasn't selfish, it was essential. On weekends, she explored new hobbies, experimenting with painting, gardening, and cooking. She read books that challenged her perspective and watched documentaries that broadened her horizons. Occasionally, she treated herself to small luxuries, like a bouquet of fresh flowers or a cozy sweater. These moments of joy weren't frivolous. They were reminders that she deserved happiness not as a reward for hard work, but as a fundamental right. Margaret also reconnected with old friends and family members, strengthening bonds that had grown distant over the years. She hosted dinner parties in her modest apartment, inviting neighbors and acquaintances to share food and laughter. Conversations flowed freely, filled with stories of triumphs and tribulations, hopes and dreams. Margaret cherished these gatherings, finding comfort in the knowledge that she wasn't alone. Life was richer when shared with others. Looking back on everything she had accomplished, Margaret felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had faced rejection, risen above it, and used her experiences to inspire others. More importantly, she had discovered a reservoir of strength within herself, a wellspring of resilience, compassion, and determination that kept her moving forward. Life hadn't magically become easier. Challenges still arose. Setbacks still occurred. But Margaret faced them with grace and grit, knowing she had the tools to overcome anything. One evening, as she sat by her window watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Margaret reflected on her journey. She thought about the hotel staff who had judged her based on appearances, the young women she mentored who reminded her of her younger self, and the countless people she encountered daily who inspired her with their resilience. She realized that her story wasn't just about reclaiming dignity or proving a point. It was about connection, about lifting others up while climbing your own mountain, about finding beauty in vulnerability and strength in community. With a contented sigh, Margaret picked up her notebook and wrote a final entry. "Life is full of moments that test us," she penned, "but it's also full of moments that remind us of our worth. The key is to hold on to those reminders, to carry them with you wherever you go. Because when you believe in yourself, the world starts believing in you too." Closing the notebook, Margaret leaned back in her chair and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new adventures. But for now, she was at peace. She had faced the world head-on and come out victorious, not because she had changed it, but because she had changed herself. And that, she realized, was the greatest triumph of all.